It's a far more enriching, it's far more self-discovery than anything, right? So I always felt that being an entrepreneur is more of a journey towards self-discovery. Because otherwise, if I'd been working somewhere, right, given my qualification and things like that, I would have possibly done a good job. But I wouldn't have realized a lot of things about myself. As an investor also, I thought that probably it's better to invest in multiple companies. I get the ringside view of whatever that is happening and stuff like that. But not the ups and downs. After a particular point in time, right, the number of zeros in your bank account doesn't matter. So you don't do it for returns. You just do it for the journey, and is there a way for you to help and stuff like that.
Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Cariappa. Cross-border finance is a gigantic problem. You have multiple entities in between. There is very complex regulation and compliance. And if you're moving abroad, you have to start from scratch all over again. This is the problem that Raghunandan and his team at Zolve are trying to solve. Think of Zolve as a global bank account that lets you access financial products and services almost instantly in any country. Raghu is an experienced entrepreneur. He was formerly the founder of TaxiForSure that got bought over by Ola Cabs. And he has since been a very prolific angel investor as well. In this conversation, we spoke about how Raghu and his team are executing on this very bold mission, some of the nuances of building a global consumer brand out of India, and of course, how the startup ecosystem has evolved over the last decade or so. This was a fun conversation with a lot of insights as well. Let's get started with this episode of the Startup Operator Podcast with Raghunandan of Zolve. Hey Raghu, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hey, thanks, Roshan. Lovely to be here.
So Raghu, I've followed your journey since the TaxiForSure days. And one thing that I ask all the serial entrepreneurs that I have on the podcast is, what are you doing differently this time around, right? And usually they have a whole laundry list of things that, that they're doing differently, some things that they're wiser on, some things that have changed simply because of the circumstance and so on. So what is it that you're doing differently this time around with Zolve?
I'm making more mistakes than what I did the first time around. But that is not really planned, but it's so very well it's happening that way. So what am I doing differently? So multiple things, I guess. I think in the first time around, I focused too much on product, right? Than too much on building the product than taking the product to a consumer, right? And more the customers, better the feedback, and the product would typically improve, right? So that's where I think in the first time around, focus more on the product side. Second time around, it's more on the distribution side, right? Because product would evolve. For that, you need to get inputs, right? The inputs will only come if you get actual customers. The more the customers, more genuine feedback, right? The product will only evolve, right? Than sitting on the product and waiting on getting a perfect product, right? It's better to get something out into the market, right? Something working, right? And get as many people to consume it so that you get to see what the product can do, cannot do, and which direction should the product that we has to take. So that's I think is probably the primary difference. And the second time around, I guess the way we went about building the organization. Right, first time around, I thought that the only way to build the org is bottom up. Right, you have to do everything right, right. So hire more junior level folks and do it. When I think access to capital was also limited then. But when we had to scale, when we had to grow, right, you didn't really have leads, managers to take much bulk of the load on the scaling and the growth side, right? The decision making was completely centralized, not by design, but that's the kind of people that we had, right? And ownership wasn't really there because we were heavy on the junior folks. This time, so effectively, loosely put, the way I would want to do it is, I think the first time around we built the team bottom up, right, parallel to the base of the pyramid. This time around we are doing more laterally, right? So instead of doing it bottom up, we are doing laterally. Right, I think that's the second difference, I guess. Otherwise, there's a long list of things, and I can consume the entire podcast talking about that only.
Oh, I'd love to talk about some more of this, right? Because it's so interesting. I think it's consistent with a lot of people, what they've said on the podcast earlier, which is, I think that common trope of, first-time founders think about product, second-time founders think about distribution, right? I think that holds true. And also, I think the second time around, you pay attention to things like org design and stuff, right? You don't just aggregate people around you and start like building an org. What about funding and, having a war chest to actually go and validate your product in the market, right? Because I do feel like, TaxiForSure back in 2014, I think it was early days of consumer internet. And obviously, we had not seen these kind of availability of capital or resources. But this time around, it feels fundamentally different, right? I mean, it feels like the ecosystem has opened up. There is capital available as well. So thoughts on that side of the business?
So again, I think when we started the first time around, right, I think the ecosystem was at a very, very, very nascent stage. It is still at a nascent stage, but at a much more advanced stage than it was earlier. So because of that, I think access to capital is there. But the thing is, there is a dearth of talent. So because there are so many heavily funded startups, right, there are so many unicorns, and bulk of them are in Bangalore, right? Getting access to good talent is going to be a challenge. So we are paying right much higher than what we used to pay earlier to get those talent. And some talent, good talent, would just want to hop around than stick around, right? So the ecosystem has changed. It's not necessarily not that just because we have access to capital, the ecosystem has changed for the better. But having said that, giving access to capital is letting entrepreneurs do a lot of experimentation. There is a plus also, and right, and most of these entrepreneurs have started a company because they're taking a risk. Right now, they have the resources to experiment as well. And if one or two of those experiments starts working out, I think the world will be a much better place than what it was earlier. And that, I think, is probably something that the access to such kind of capital would be there. Right. And given my previous experience running the venture, right, if there is access to capital, I think it makes sense to take it. Then wait for it. It's always better to have the capital in your bank account than the investor's bank account, right? Because, and the best part of fundraising, what I've learned is probably the hard way, is you have to raise capital when you don't need capital. When you need capital, nobody wants to invest. When you don't need capital, that's when everybody wants to invest, and that's probably a better place to be in.
Right. So basically, when you can walk away from the table, you have the chips on the in terms of negotiation also, right? I mean, you can.
Yeah, so effectively, see, the thing is, so what I understand is, I think it was so because we're spending time on the fundraisers bit, right? Because of access to capital. So the three ways you can raise capital. One is based on traction. You have achieved this and you'll achieve more, give me money. Second thing is based on some inflection point, right? So demonetization was Paytm's inflection point. Let's say crypto regulations could be some crypto guys' inflection point, right? So there are multiple inflection points. You say that, okay, we are at that inflection point, give me money, I'll take it. Right, Dream 11, right? Supreme Court came up with an order that probably Dream 11 is not illegal, it's legal. So then all the MPL and all those guys, right? It was an inflection point for all the gaming startups, right? So you be at an inflection point, you tell them, okay, I'm at an inflection point, give me money, I'll take it and run with it, right? The third thing is on a narration. What is the story that you want to sell? And the story gets evolved as the startup does, spends more time in the ecosystem, in the market, right? Because when you started off, you would have some limited understanding. But once you're building the business, right, you get a much deeper understanding of the customers. You understand what the solution that you have, what is the different kinds of problems that it can solve, how do you position your product and stuff like that, right? You get a significant amount of narration, right? So if you build it on traction, it's only just you get a probably a 2x, 3x. Only on traction. Okay, you've done this, so you can probably go further away, right? Inflection point is again, so there's an inflection point, there's a change in regulation, right? Whatever it is, right? Because of which you can go through the roof. I think the best stories are your best way to raise capital is based on narration and support the narration with traction, right? You have an amazing story to tell, right? And that story is not building castles in the air. And the initial set of traction that you have, it is supporting the story that you want to sell, right? That story that you want to build, right? And that's what the most investors want to latch on. It's not about what you did so far. What are you going to build with my money is what most investors are interested in knowing. Right. And then the traction says that, okay, you're in the right direction, right? And that is, I think, which changes. And that I think is probably some entrepreneurs who have experience, right, would be able to do that.
So right? one more question on this note, and then we can move on to Zolve very quickly after that. So, this ready access to capital, right? And of course, I mean, it has a downside as well. What are some things that, founders, young entrepreneurs who are listening to this should, beware of? Like one thing you mentioned is it can fund experiments, but sometimes you also feel that it may fund too many of these experiments, right? And people aren't really sticking to a particular thing for enough time or something like that, right? So what are some downsides that you see?
It's a very tough thing to do, Roshan. It's very easy for me to say that, right, stick to your plan just because there is more money and stuff like that. Don't change your plan significantly and things like that. But it's so hard to do. I think probably a surrogate for this, so that more people can relate to it. It's let's say you do your graduation and you get some, let's say, X lakh rupees as salary per annum. So from no money, from parents' money, and you move to your money, so you just have a much better lifestyle than what you had during your college days. And you're chilling, you're having a nice time and things like that. And you do that for a couple of years. Then you do, let's say you do a postgrad, let's say you do an MBA. Post MBA, you'll end up in a much higher paying job. Obviously, right? Otherwise, people don't do MBAs, right? You get a so now your lifestyle has gotten used to the higher compensation, the salaries that you're making, right? Now, for whatever reason, if I ask you to go back and live the life that you did after, let's say, your graduation, would you be happy? Because you were happy then. It's not that you were not happy. You were happy, you were content, you had your own friends, set of friends and stuff like that. Just because you do an MBA and you get to a higher income bracket, it's so difficult and gotten used to that life. So it's so difficult for you to go back and do it. It's not impossible, right? Your expenses will change based on your CTC.
The standards
right?
have shifted.
Right. So exactly. The same thing happens with those entrepreneurs who raise some crazy capital. Otherwise, it's so easy to say. Right. And that's where I think someone who has to keep their a sound mind on the shoulders to really figure out what we do and what needs to be done and stuff like that, right? And again, people make mistakes, people learn. Then some people listen to this and try to curtail. People who learn from mistakes, they'll never set out on that path. People who confine themselves by listening to this will slip sometime or the other, right? And it's always better to slip early, make those mistakes early, and then wake up. And since you burnt your fingers, then you really do that. I've seen this happen in so many multiple ways. I mean, that I invest in a whole lot of startups. I've been part of significant journeys. I have got a few unicorns and few soon unicorns also in my portfolio. I've seen these guys. Some were heavily funded, some struggled, some kept on doing up rounds, some people did down rounds. Irrespective of that, right? Once you have money, people spend. Right? It's not that there's a problem with people. Right. But I think it's a genuine human nature, and that's where I think people like us who have some experience, right, can possibly help out people on where to focus on, where not to focus on, where to throw money, where not to throw money, where to conserve cash, where not to conserve cash. So that's how it works.
Right. Yeah, I also feel more positive that, we have a lot more good advice and mentors and everything at this point of time than, about 5-6 years back. I think
it's phenomenal. I mean, I respect majority of the Indian founders that way, and not just founders, right? Even the senior leadership in multiple different companies, right? I think not many people talk about it. I think there is this thing about giving it back to the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right. That is prevalent. I don't think so. I haven't really come across anybody who is hesitating talking to founders who need help, right? Whether it's 2 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning, right? In the middle of your own board meeting and stuff like that, right? Everybody take those calls. Everyone help people out and things like that. Not only on the business level side of things, but even through some of the personal challenges that entrepreneurs go through. Everybody wants everything to work and stuff like that. And irrespective of what stage the company is in and all that, I think that is significant amount of maturity that people display in the ecosystem, right? And nobody sees anybody as a threat. Nobody's jealous of anybody's success and stuff like that. Everybody's trying to help each other out. I think that I think is phenomenal in the Indian startup ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a huge change. That's a very big change, actually. So, all right, let's talk about the problem that you're solving with Zolve, right? It seems like a gigantic problem, cross-border finance. Finance itself seems like a huge enough problem with plenty of loopholes and stuff that, you can really solve for customer experience and so on and so forth. But what are some of the nuances of cross-border finance, and what are some of the challenges that, lay people may not completely understand?
So interesting. So I think when you talk about normal folks, right, I think there's this huge perception issue when it comes to cross-border. Let's say we are looking at the India to US corridor, right? So people assume that US is a developed country and India is a developing country. And if UPI exists in India, right, where you choose the phone number and get transferred, the perception is US is at a much more advanced stage, where you think about transferring money to Roshan and the transfer happens. But the problem is the fintech ecosystem in US is so backward that account to account money transfer takes 2 to 3 days. In India, it happens instantaneously. There it takes 2 to 3. So that I think that challenge of perception is something that is difficult to deal with, because people don't know that yet. So they come with us, go there, and they see that, boss, in India, we were doing it instantaneously. Why is it taking 2-3 days? Right? So if somebody has to pay the credit card bill, most of the Indians pay credit card bill on the last day. In the US, you do that on the last day, right? The money gets credited on the credit card bill after 3-4 days. Right. So for the 3-4 days, you get some crazy interest being levied on you. So there are certain education that needs to really happen. Right. And when it comes to compliance, right, US is a lot more stricter compared to what we can get in India. The KYC norms are extremely strict. Money laundering is extremely strict. So their bank system is extremely regulated and compliance focused. And frauds are very, very high. So a lot of fraudsters across the world are looking at US markets. So they just need an access to a significant account to really do that. So people may not really go after accounts in India, but there are tons of fraudsters across the world going after the US. Having said that, there are some amazing advantages also. I think in India, we don't really have insurance on the bank accounts, but in the US, you have every single bank account is covered with a $250,000 coverage, insurance coverage. So if anything happens also, the government ensures that these people are covered and people don't have to pay any premium on the insurance and stuff like that also. Right. So that ways, I think that there are significant advantages and stuff like that also, right? So I think we are at a place where we're looking at what is best in the home country, which is India, and what is best in the US. And we marry the best in this country and marry with the best in the US, right? And provide a phenomenal experience to the customer. So that's the business that we are in.
This episode is brought to you by Mulya. You want to move fast? Sure. But without breaking things? Now that's a hard ask. The thing is, once you have some base of users and customers, you just cannot afford to risk quality. So how do the likes of Cred, Swiggy and CureFit, some of India's fastest growing startups, ship at lightning pace and delight their users and customers? Simple, they're working with Mulya as a strategic quality partner. Mulya is India's most talented and passionate community of testers. They've helped prevent thousands of bugs and regression issues. So as a CTO or a product owner, if you want to reduce tech debt, especially while you scale, do check out Mulya.com. I've interviewed Mulya's founder and CEO Pradeep on the podcast earlier, and we spoke about how startups can improve quality while scaling and things to that effect. You should definitely check it out. I'll link to it in the description below. Now back to your regular programming. So if I understand correctly, Raghu, Zolve is a global account, right? That will help me seamlessly, access financial services in multiple countries, right? At a very broad level, right? So what was that aha moment for you in terms of starting Zolve, and how did you go from idea to product to company?
So the aha moment came after we got the idea and things like that, Roshan. So again, so there were multiple opportunities, multiple places where I could have taken my next step. But I think this one makes a lot of sense because I think this is way out of my comfort zone. Building yet another consumer business in India is a bit more easier for me, right? Because one is I've built a consumer business. I've been part of multiple consumer businesses and stuff like that. But I don't think so that would keep me up in the night. And something like this is, I think, building a global consumer product out of India from day one has not been attempted before, and that is a big challenge. So when there's challenges like that, I wouldn't probably not hesitate to take up such kind of challenges. So it is good. So there is a significant amount of learning, right? And sometimes I don't even know what I'm doing also. And and walk through compliances, regulations. It's pretty complex that way. How do we take this complex thing and simplify to the users? And that excites me. But most importantly, as I mentioned before, right, building a global consumer product out of India, that is something that is super exciting for me. When I started doing some research on the problem. So, and again, how I got the idea was fairly straightforward. For my angel investments, I used to travel across the world. So I used to travel a lot to China, Israel, Korea, and in the US, right, just to figure out what kind of investments are happening, what kind of startups are coming up and stuff like that. During one such travel, I met up with a bunch of my friends in New York, right? So they were hosting me for dinner. After dinner, right? So when the check came, they were trying to pay it by cash. But none of us use cash to pay bills. We use a credit card to bill. So I asked them, why don't you use your credit card to pay? So they're like, no, we don't get credit cards here. Like, what do you mean by that? I mean, you guys have some amazing profiles in India. How come you don't get? No, it's the same case. Go to the bank, so nothing. We don't get anything. And then I thought probably Indians are treated that way in the US. Then I spoke to some friends from Canada, Spain, and others. They also told me the same thing. Then I thought that probably US treats people that way. Then I spoke to people in Germany, UK, Australia, right? They also said the same thing. That then I realized that it's any country to any country problem. So people in one country, because they don't have a local credit history, right? They end up being, by default, they're treated as high credit risk individual, right? Because of which the life becomes a struggle during the initial days. Then I thought, why should these people struggle? Because these guys have a phenomenal history in their home country, and the risk profile should not really ideally not change. Let's say if I'm in Bangalore, if I move to Bombay or Delhi, I'm the same risk profile guy. Yeah. But instead of Bombay or Delhi, if I end up in New York, I become a high risk. So my behavior doesn't change based on my location. Just because the financial institutions in one country doesn't talk to the financial institutions in another country, there is an arbitrage where a low risk profile guy is treated as high risk profile guy. That's the problem that we wanted to address. Then we thought that, okay, so this is a good problem to go and we can probably sort it out.
Right. But that sounds easy when you say it out. But actually, how are you executing on it? Is it like a lot of banking partnerships? I mean, I think that, there'll be a ton of technology complexity also and so on, right? So how are you executing on these things? How are you stitching all of these experiences together, basically?
It's not really that complicated, to ask me, Roshan. So the metric or rather the philosophy in which we are going ahead and doing this, right? If someone is already doing this and someone is good at it, we want to partner with those people. If there is nobody who's good at it, right? So those are the places where we want to innovate. So with this philosophy, we go to the market and we figure out who are the right partners that we get on board, right? And we talk to these partners and we get those people on board, because everybody understands that this is a great customer segment. Because I think the migrant Indians are probably the most affluent of the category. Yeah. They're actually super prime customers, just because the banks don't have systems to underwrite them, and they're not able to do so. And that's where we come into the picture. So the business model is fairly simple. We acquire customers in India before they migrate, get access to the credit history, their education history, employment history, and everything. And we have our own underwriting model through which we'll figure out whether the individuals are low risk, right? Once we figure out these individuals are low risk, we are partnered with a bank in the US through whom we provide a bank account, debit card, credit card, loans, insurances, remittances, everything at market rates. So that on day one, so that before they take their flight to the US, they have everything, all these things, so that they can access all these things. So that instead of, as of today, people take Forex card, take cash, and go to the US while they're traveling, right? Now with us, right, they can open up the bank account, remit the money into their US bank account, and let the money wait for them before they get there, right? And when they get access to credit card and stuff like that, so the initial days also be significantly smoother. And the interesting thing is, because now they have access to multiple of these unsecured credit products, they can start building the credit history a lot more sooner than what it would have taken if you don't go with us. So that's where it provides us phenomenal help to the customers. Again, there are multiple banking partners, there are multiple banking as a service players, there are multiple KYC vendors, there is a lot of compliance, fraud, and everything. But we want to mask all those things to the customer, so that the customer logs onto the platform, provides a PAN number, passport, and they get access to the debit card, bank account, credit card, everything. So we are in the business of providing customers what they need, making their life a lot more simpler and a lot more convenient. That's the business that we are in.
Right. And for the customers, Zolve is the front end, right? I mean, they don't get to interact.
They get the Zolve bank account, Zolve debit card, credit card, everything. Everything is Zolve.
So how do you see yourself building a very sustainable moat? Is this through the technology partnerships? Is this through some kind of first movers advantage? Like, what do you see as a sustainable moat? Because oftentimes when people bring up the word neobank, right? I mean, we just think of it as a front end that it will solve the customer experience, but I'm sure that there are a lot more deeper nuances to that, right? So, can you talk about that?
So significantly, I think it's not just about the customer experience. So there is compliance, there is fraud, there is customer acquisition, right? And what kind of KYC that you can do, right? So we do KYC on both the India side and also on the US side. Since we have a presence in India, it's a lot more easy for us to acquire customers in India, understand what these metrics mean, right? So for example, let's say an Experian in US for the US individual has around 16,000 attributes for every individual who applies for a thing. In India, it's around 1,500, right? How do you make sense? Because US banks can't do anything with 1,500 because their systems are built to handle all the 16,000 and underwrite based on that. So, but in India, we are doing a good job in underwriting based on these attributes. And we know that, again, this will evolve over a period of time and stuff like that, right? So those are the nuances. It's not really a copy paste thing, right? Anybody can come and do this, right? So how do you make sense of an individual with only 2,500 attributes when you are effectively making sense of individual with 16,000 attributes? There are nuances. And how do you acquire customers, right? So Uber, Amazon are all struggled in India. Right, running operations in India is a lot more challenging, and running a pure play tech business also. So there are moats that way. Moats in data, moats in access to data, because the Indian credit data cannot leave India and go to the US, right? So there are certain regulations, there are certain operational intelligence, there are certain proprietary algorithms which make sense of the data and then do it. So those would be typically the moat to begin with. But if you're able to solve these problems over a period of time, right? So we were the only ones who are doing it. And most of the migrants talk to the migrants in the US. So we build a brand around that. And if you're able to solve whatever the problem that I try to articulate, right? If you're able to do a good job of it, and because of which our customers' life gets better, then in that case, that itself gives us a significant amount of referrals, a lot more repeats. And then you do that. That's the thing, right? So that's more on the initial stage of it. But when you really look deeper into the market, right? So when it comes to financial services, most of the people don't change their financial services path. Yeah. For example, how long have you been banking with the same bank?
14 years.
Exactly. Don't tell me there aren't any better banks come in those 14 years, right? But this is not like a Swiggy, Zomato, or Amazon, Flipkart, or Uber, right? Where you're optimizing for time or cost or price and stuff like that. As long as your banking partner does whatever they're supposed to do, and once you have the trust and stuff like that, there's no reason for you to change. And if you are the first bank partner that our customers get, right, and there is no reason, if we don't give them a reason to change, or give them a good number of reasons for them to continue with us, our customers would not leave us. Then the entire customer lifetime value is ours. So the model becomes a unit level economics positive from day one because we acquire customers in India in Indian rupees. We are making revenues in US dollars. Costs are in low value currency, revenues are in high value currency. The model is unit level profitable from day one. And people don't change the backing factor. So the entire customer lifetime value is ours. Right? The more products, more features you have, right? The more enriched the customer experiences. So there is no reason for the customers to go. On top of that, currently how the life works is people have two different financial identities. One financial identity for the US market, another financial identity within India. We want to club both of them together. And most of the people who are migrating are managing their families back in India. How do we help them? Right? Not just in terms of remittances and stuff like that. So they have investments in India. They invest in the US markets also. How do we get a common view there? So they have health insurance policies, retirement policies in the US, right? How can we cover the same, cover their parents in India with the same health insurance policy? Right? How can, so most of the people living abroad are helping doing Swiggy, Myntra to their parents back in India. The US cards or other foreign cards don't work in those platforms. Can we provide them a multi-currency card so that they can manage their families better? So there are a lot of interactions that is happening between the Indian market and the US market. How do we make it a lot more convenient, a lot more seamless? That's the business that we are into.
Amazing. So when you're building partnerships with larger incumbents, right? So you're taking this very compelling value proposition to them and saying that, you're going to acquire these potentially very profitable customers, right? How do you sort of position yourself with these people? Any advice on building partnerships with these larger people, maybe like Visa or Bank of America or whoever else?
So see, all these larger guys, right? So they're looking at for different customer segments. So most of the banks and other partners in the US are focusing most on their internal customers, right? So none of them are looking at these migrant customers, not because they don't want to, it's just that because the systems and processes are not built for this customer segment, right? So from their perspective, this is a smaller customer segment than this. But from our vantage point, right, these are affluent customers. It's all economics of scale versus economics of scope. These are high value, low number of customers. Right? And most of the banks are focused on low value, a larger population. And again, these customers who are going from India to abroad, right? So they are the ones who want to build a life over there, right? Those are the guys who are not the ones who are going to default, right? Those are not the folks who are revolvers, right? On the credit line and things like that. So that way, I think we have a good market there to do that, right? So that's what we bring to the table to the partners, telling that you guys have not ignored this customer segment so far, right? We are getting this customer segment. We will take the risk. Right, you understand this customer segment, and these are the affluent customers, because of which, right, more and more partners are working with us.
Right. So this fundamental attribute of building for the world, right? I think it would have affected everything that you would have done, right? Product, marketing, how you've hired, who you've hired, etc. Can you talk to us about that? Building a consumer product for the world from India, right? What are some of the 2 or 3 principles that you are following?
So it's amazing. So more than principles, right? It's the challenges that exist, right? One is, I think, as I mentioned earlier, right? None of them have attempted before, right? Probably the best product in India may not necessarily be average in the US also. So we have got a phenomenal opportunity to build a product which will be used in the global market. And I don't think so we'll probably get it right the first time. But we have an opportunity to take multiple attempts at it, learn from our customers. And that is super exciting for us, right? And if anybody is looking at building something like that, where they can build their own identity, right, building a global consumer product, I think we are the right place for them. That is a lot more exciting. How to look at it, right? The way to look at Indian products in India is probably more for the Indian consumers. How do we build a product which are geography agnostic, right? And that is what is something that is super exciting, right? Geography agnostic, language agnostic, right to left to right languages, right? How do you get the content also, which has that cultural undertone also for those markets. So those are some. So if you ask me what kind of solutions exist, I don't know. Or do you think that we should be able to build? I'm pretty confident we will be able to build, right? And our customers are helping us build that. So that I think is one. Second thing is, I think, so when we're building TF estates, we're looking at opening up multiple cities within India. And doing the same thing obviously will not exist. Now we are opening up multiple countries, right? And that is as global as it can get, right? And in terms of opportunities also, right? So people who are good, right? So in TFS also, the culture was that people who perform well will start moving up, irrespective of their destination, irrespective of the areas of experience and things like that. People who are delivering, people who are taking up the ownership and the responsibilities, right? They grow, right? Similarly, here also, right? In Zolve also, right? People who are part of this, and if they're able to deliver on all this, right? And again, they will are the ones who will probably start globetrotting, right? In multiple countries, figure out, talk to customers over there, build the businesses in different countries and things like that. And also, I think the one thing that really bound us as a team in TFS was something that I would continue to do. That is, I think it's not about the challenges. I think that there are challenges day in and day out and stuff like that. It's all about the kind of people that we worked with. When everybody shoulders responsibilities, it's not just an individual's problem to solve. It's our responsibility to solve. So people will pitch in, irrespective of whether it's their teams or their departments and stuff like that, right? So people are interested in solving problems. When you have some interesting problems to solve, and we have some amazing bunch of people to brainstorm, to work together to solve those problems. And once you solve the problems, once you get those customer feedback, once you get those amazing customer testimonials, right, there's a lot more satisfaction. So when I look back now, I don't remember the exit of TFS or the money that I made and stuff like that. When I look back now, I think I remember only the amazing magic moments that we had. So the stresses that we went through, the bang your head onto the wall kind of things that I remember. And I remember those parties that we had after successfully solving a few things, building a business, building a culture, building an organization, right? Those are the things that I remember than the number of rides that we did, the kind of bank balances that we have, right? Then the kind of number of PR articles that we have and stuff like that, right? And that makes our life a lot more interesting, a lot more challenging, right? And so there are a few good things that we did in TFS, and we want to replicate those things. There are a few mistakes that we did. We want to learn from those mistakes, and we want to address it, right? And those are some of the things that I would be doing. Yeah.
Right. So you're roughly a year into the Zolve journey, right? So what do you have coming up in terms of new products or expansion? You mentioned like global ambition, right? I mean, so what do you have coming up in the next maybe 18 months or so?
Well, we have a lot of things in the pipeline. All right. So one is, I think, so we open it up for students, right? Because when there was those were the only ones who were allowed to travel. So now we are looking at opening up for working professionals and also tourists who are traveling, and even the Indians who want to open a bank accounts in the US and probably invest in the US markets and stuff like that. That's something that we're opening up. We're looking at other geographies also, right? Be it Canada, UK, Europe, and Australia, right? So those are the things that we are planning to, and we already have some partnerships already in place for all those. So those are the things that we'll be working on.
Right. So, you mentioned earlier your stint as an investor as well, right? Prolific investor. So having been on both sides of the table as a founder, as an investor, right? How does, I'm just curious, how does one part affect the others? Having been an investor, how does it affect you as a founder and vice versa?
Difficult, man. How do I say this? It's so difficult. So it's like, I think the difference between an entrepreneur and investor would be like an umpire on a cricket ground is an investor, the player is the entrepreneur. You get to see the game at close quarters, but you don't go through the pressures of the player. But yeah, so you have to guide the teams in the right direction also, right? But yeah, so an umpire becomes so after watching so many games so closely, right, it's very difficult to resist the temptation not to play. So that's the reason so many people make comebacks and stuff like that.
Right. But I guess as an investor, you have more of an objective view of the business and the market also, right? And because founders tend to be more passionate about the idea, about the solution, and so on.
I know if we if you don't have passion, we're just dead men walking, right? So it's sorry to say that, but that's what it is, right? I think so. As I mentioned during the call, as well, it's if you don't really let your mind be engulfed with a problem and you have sleepless nights and stuff like that, no, there is far more excitement at the end of it when you're able to overcome that, than not going through those phases, right? It's a far more enriching. It's far more self-discovery than anything, right? So I always felt that being an entrepreneur is more of a journey towards self-discovery. Because otherwise, if I'd been working somewhere, right, given my qualification and things like that, I would have possibly done a good job. But I wouldn't have realized a lot of things about myself. As an investor, also, I thought that probably it's better to invest in multiple companies. I get a ringside view of whatever that is happening and stuff like that. But not the ups and downs. After a particular point in time, right, the number of zeros in your bank account doesn't matter. So you don't do it for returns. You just do it for the journey. And is there a way for you to help and stuff like that? Right. And then the more you see more people doing it, right, and it's contagious. You want to get your hands dirty and stuff like that, right? I don't know if you are into sports, which I know for sure that you are into sports. It's very hard to be a 12th man.
Yeah, it is.
But how long are you going to be a 12th man?
Yeah.
Right. You want to get that exposure. You want to take it and go into the field, right? And that's what it is, I guess.
Right. So Raghu, this has been a fascinating chat. People listening to it will obviously get your enthusiasm and about Zolve and the huge problem that you guys are solving. So before you leave us, any books or podcasts that you would recommend to our listeners?
Oh, the multiple books. Depending on where you want to start and stuff like that, right? I think if somebody wants to be an entrepreneur, I think the hard thing about hard things is probably a must read for all those folks, right? So doing that. And some people who want to really dip their hands into startup and stuff like that, don't worry about your career options. Don't worry about the kind of startup. right? The space that they are in and stuff like that. I think for those guys who are looking at more breadth, right, probably range would be a good book to read. So that's amazing. And I think the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, that's also a phenomenal book to read and get your hands dirty, right? So there are I mean, there's a long list of books, and what we do within Zolve and even TFS was every Diwali, along with the Diwali gift box, we would gift people books, right? And these are some of those books, right, that I talked about, because we want people to get up to speed, people to learn, people to and because it's the same thing that we keep saying, right? People don't can't relate to, but there is something that the books tell us, give the context and stuff like that, right? So then people could relate to, right? So these are some of the books that people want to talk about.
Cool. So this was a fun chat, Raghu. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Roshan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.